Today we're going to review a particularly sticky situation. It's an engine failure at night in the weather, really not good weather, so stick with me on FlyWire. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire we're going to look at the accident of Bonanza 19 Mike Tango at White Plains, KHPN, New York on 19 January 2023. The weather played, I think, a pretty significant role in this accident, so we're going to start with that first. I just think it's appropriate because it set up basically everything else. The weather at HPN was reported at 200 overcast. The controller actually reported to the pilot at some point that it was 300 overcast. With 1 mile visibility, the temperature is 3 degrees C and dew point's 2 degrees C. And the radar, I'll show that right here, shows the aircraft flying in precipitation pretty much throughout the whole accident sequence. Just to the northwest, a little bit further up there, along the planned route of flight, there's ice and snow on the radar. It's very likely that the A36 was in icing conditions at 5,000 feet, if it's a 1 degree spread at the surface. Combined with the nighttime conditions, this was not good weather for a non-flight in unknown icing, FICI single-engine piston airplane to be in, period. So the aircraft took off on an IFR flight plan from JFK Airport into IMC. It was first vectored easterly, then north, and then finally on a northwesterly heading. Not bad, really, for getting out of JFK. And it was climbing to assigned altitude of 8,000 feet when the accident sequence began. A rather slow climb and may have been a factor. 25 minutes into the flight, passing 5,000 feet MSL, the pilot asked the controller if he could stop his climb at 6,000 feet. Seconds later, the pilot reported that the airplane was experiencing poor performance. So let's listen to the radio. It's a little hard to hear, but let's listen to it.
19 Mike Tango, traffic 2 o'clock and 4 miles southwest bound at E190 at 4,000.
Departure, level 100 Mike Tango. Can you stop our climb at 6,000?
You can for now, but I have to climb you to 8 along this route. So if you want to level off at 6 for a minute to accelerate or do something, that's fine, but I am going to keep you climbing to 8 in about 10 to 15 miles.
We're not getting the performance we're expecting. Not certain why.
Roger, are you unable 8,000? I can get you an alternate route up over Huguenot. Probably that'll keep you down low. Tango, Roger. And you think you might have an issue, or is it just you're not sure what's going on?
The pilot was confronted by an airplane that wasn't climbing as he thought it should. The controller had an altitude issue in as much as that if the Bonanza was to continue northwestbound, it would have to climb higher very quickly. That's why he's talking about it. I can't keep you there very long. The radio isn't very clear, so sometimes I'm going to interpret here. Done my best to try to clean it up, but there it is. The pilot is relating his problem in the climb, and the controller ends by asking if he has an issue. I think the pilot's demeanor on the radio was that he had not considered it was a serious mechanical issue at this point. It was just a problem. So let's listen to the next. Here the controller suggests that a divert to HPN, and the pilot agrees. It's just right there. It's right off the right wing. Then after the controller prods the pilot to turn, the pilot declares an emergency for dropping oil pressure. Let's listen to the next section.
19 Mike Tango, the Westchester County Airport's right off your right wing if you want to land and check it out.
Near departure, we have figured out the problem. I've got a dead cylinder, so we would like to go to Westchester, and I'll take vectors for that. 19 Mike Tango.
19 Mike Tango, you're clear to the Westchester County Airport via radar vectors. Turn right, heading 340 and maintain 5,000.
I think we can see a little bit of a helmet fire here. The pilot overturns to the southeast. The controller corrects him. The pilot again declares an emergency for dropping oil pressure, and you can detect the stress level going up. Not so much in his voice, but pacing, etc. The controller directs a northeast heading as part of a vector for the White Plains ILS 16.
19 Mike Tango, when you can, make a right turn heading 340. Looks like I see you doing it now.
I am declaring emergency. Our oil pressure is dropping. 19 Mike Tango.
Now I want you to listen carefully to this next sequence of radio exchanges. He declares an emergency yet again for dropping oil pressure, and the controller acknowledges and vectors him for a downwind for runway 16 with a descent to 3,000, okay? And at some point, he even declares a mayday, mayday, mayday for the same thing, dropping oil pressure. So here we go.
19 Mike Tango, it looks like you're on a hard right turn to the southeast. So I just want you to fly wings level and maintain 5,000. Can you do that?
Wings level 5,000. November 19 Mike Tango.
I don't care what heading, just fly wings level at 5,000. 19 Mike Tango, so what heading do you show yourself on now?
I'm on a 090 heading, and we are going to declare emergency. We are losing oil pressure.
19 Mike Tango, roger. Can you turn left heading 070 back to ILS 16?
070 for the ILS 16. I'm on 19 Mike. Yes, sir.
At this point, the pilot is definitely concerned about the mechanical problem, but he's behind the power curve regarding headings and altitudes and things like that, and remains so throughout the rest of the flight. I imagine the IMC conditions were rough and disorienting, and now with an engine problem piled on top of it all, it was an issue. Fundamentally, I think the pilot, and by extension the controller, believed this to be a partial power situation. The controller at one point did ask the pilot if the engine had quit or was it making partial power. No discernible response from the pilot to the controller on that query, but that's kind of the situation. The controller was doing pretty good. The bottom line here is the pilot holds the trump card, and he was flying the plane. He was determined to try and make this a normal pattern for vectors to the ILS and downwind, and then descend to 3,000 feet for an airport at 439-foot elevation. With respects to lessons learned here, and I think that's pretty much important here, I'm not going to dissect the whole rest of the accident. I think this is the important point that we need to consider is the lessons here. My heart goes out to this pilot and passenger at this point. I can truly imagine that they had not considered being in this situation at all, and conversely, had not developed a plan of action. They were trying to go with the flow, thinking they had some power. Who among us has wargamed this situation? If you have, good on you. Once the engine starts to lose oil pressure, I think you're on borrowed time. You have to forsake the normal comfort of vectors to a standard, even a shortened ILS final approach, and you never, never, never give up altitude until you don't need it anymore. Because without an engine, altitude is your life. It's the only option you have. It gives you whatever options you can generate. The hardest thing to do may be to give up a semblance of normal and do what you have to do. I'm saying that betting on the odds of the engine continuing to work enough to keep you in the air for a normal approach is not a good idea. It's not a plan, not a great strategy. You got what you got, and use it until you can't, but don't depend on it. Okay, I know it's night, low overcast, bare minimums for even shooting an ILS, period. But we already know there will be no go-arounds, no missed approach, no say intentions. There's only one shot here. With a failing engine, even if it hadn't quit yet, you basically can only plan one. This is far from a normal situation. It is an emergency. Just saying mayday, 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 or it's an emergency on radio doesn't work. What strategy works best here? Number one is don't panic. Work the problem. And, frankly, I've heard all kinds of suggestions on the interweb about shooting an approach with a 5 or 6 degree glide slope, this or that option, or trying to work the math out on the fly. Well, here's the thing. I did a lot of math when I was in college, and I'll admit, I worked hard at it because it wasn't natural, but I did pretty well, and, I don't do it anymore. I haven't done math in a long time like that, and so I don't do that anymore. I do air math, and air math is very simple, with a capital S, as in very, very simple. For some reason, it's hard to fly an airplane, even at 2 miles a minute, and figure out a simple equation. Try throwing on night in bouncy cold weather and trying to shoot an approach to men's with zero margins for error and a failing engine. I'd expect even a math genius could not come up with the right answer in this situation, much less be able to factor in the winds and other variables that are likely to happen. So when I think of the strategies to cope with this situation, I think the simpler is better. Okay, this is my nickel here. I think the simplest is the best approach. There are just too many variables to handle with any complex plan. So what I am suggesting is that you fall back on what you train, on how you train. Hopefully you are training for an engine failure, and one of those quarterly maneuvers or every 6 months, to exercise our pilot skills that we should all be doing. Hopefully you're flying with an add to this. Hopefully you're flying with an iPad with ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot or some other EFB with a good map. I'd say zoom deep down into that map and fly towards the airport. I'm going to give you a few pictures of ForeFlight here. Don't waste a foot of that precious altitude. Get overhead the airport ASAP. Fly direct to the airport and circle above it. My strategy is do the same engine out pattern I do any single engine airplane and day VFR. Okay? It's get to the airport and start a spiral descent. If I can make an airport, that's what I'm going to do. If you have enough oil pressure left over after the engine quits, or even before it does, you know what's going to happen. Pull it back. When you pull the prop all the way back into Bonanza, your descent rate goes, at best glide, if you're best glide, would go from about 1,500 feet per minute to 1,000 feet per minute. That's huge. Either way, I'm going to do what I can and then concentrate on making my geometry work out. I'm not going to worry about the engine or whatever. I've got my energy. I'm overhead the airport, and I'm going to circle down, and I have to worry about lining up with something. And I'm going to use that iPad to zoom in deep on the aerial map, forget the sectional or whatever, and I'm going to fly the plane. So in this situation, he passed within a mile or two of the airport, less than a mile, at 5,000 feet, I think it was. And if he had turned to circle overhead, he probably would have approximately 4,500 feet to use to land. That equates to 3 turns at 1,500 feet per minute, or 4.5 if he was at 1,000. So you can see it's pretty big. All the talk about miles to go at best glide is just that, it's talk. When you're in the air and it happens for real, everything is different. It just never turns out to be what the best glide number is. I'd plan on using the first turn to adjust my path and then figure out the winds. The second turn is a freebie to fine-tune things, and then the last turn will be my landing pattern. Even if I'm a little bit high, I can use drag devices to do that. I can put flaps out, gear. It doesn't really matter if you land into the wind or not. I probably am not even going to plan on using the gear. My desire is to land on a runway or a taxiway, but there are lots of open spaces on an airport, and that will be just fine with me. Okay, if it's a hard surface, if a hard surface doesn't work out, then the grass is fine. At least there's not trees or cars or anything like that. So gear up unless I'm aligned with a hard surface when I pop out of the clouds, and I have time to get it down. I'd rather just let the insurance company take care of it instead of adding this to my helmet fire at this point. So I've got my hands full flying the airplane to survive, and that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to work at it every second until I'm down. In the case of 19 Mike Tango, the pilot was never able to overcome the instrument approach setup, the mindset, that's what I'm talking about here. He reached as far as 5 miles away from the airport and eventually overshot the runway. Unfortunately, they did not survive the landing. I'm not going to go into detail, but when you stall in, it never works out well, rarely. I'm pretty sure that most of us would not have been able to cope with this situation faced by this pilot, just making it up as you go along. That's why I'm talking about it now. As I mentioned before, this is one accident scenario that definitely requires some thought ahead of time to have any chance of success. And I define success, this is how I define it, as me and my passenger being able to walk away. To me, that sounds like a pretty good aspirational goal in an emergency situation. Everybody walks away. Whatever happens to the airplane, happens to the airplane. But especially this one at night, IMC, in a very crowded, built-up terrain, there's not a lot of choices. The bottom line is that you have to be able to cut through the normal and ruthlessly zero in on the possible. What your reality is. Reality is a hard taskmaster. So be in charge of the radios, tell them what you're going to do, and then go do it. Let them clear the field, Let them worry about the fire department. That's why your authority is, that's what within your authority is pilot and command. The idea is to fly the airplane as far into the accident as possible. Be conservative. Okay, don't overestimate your ability to handle the complexities of this situation. Anyway, that's my nickel on the grass. Hopefully this video will start a lot of you thinking and talking about the situation and what strategies might or might not work. I'm not saying mine's the actual perfect solution and will work for everybody in every situation, but tell me what you think and what your friends are talking about. That's the way we figure these things out ahead of time, so we have a strategy when the S hits the fan. What other strategies are out there? It is human nature, I think, and when they think of complex solutions to simple problems. I caution against that. The simpler the better. Simple is easy. Simple you can do. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, hit like and subscribe. Looks like that here. And hit the bell for notifications. I've heard that helps. I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters here. I appreciate you. If you'd like to support the channel, I'll leave a link below to the FlyWire Patreon page. So thanks for watching. Talk about this scenario and think about it. And I'll see you next time on FlyWire.